Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Inner Conquest, the world's greatest modern metaphysics channel. I'm your host, Jacob Edens, and today we are going to be discussing how will unlocks unconditional thought. So, when you think about a condition, right, you want to think we could take law of assumption for an example, right? So, if you hold an assumption in your mind, what that is, in essence, is what someone would call fourth dimensional thinking. So instead of thinking linearly, right, you think, well, I'm this person and then I'm going to go do these things and then I can get this, right? If everything is happening now, the structure of your thought is essentially putting you here and your desire here. So you've created in your mental space a distance between where you are and where you want to be, right? So if you perpetuate the distance, everything is now constantly you're going to create things that are not here. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to close that distance with your assumptive thought as if it's happening now. I have this right here, right? And remember, so say my goal is to have this coffee cup. If I know that I'm in a reality that's a little bit keyed down, meaning that it's slower, right? So for the sake of argument, it's all one reality, but you could call your mental space your fourth dimensional reality, and you call it a fourth dimensional reality because it's immediate, right? So if I go in my mind, I can see my hand with a coffee cup immediately, right? Now, if I hold that mental assumption and I extrapolate that to my reality, to where in my hand, I am seeing in my mind and feeling with my mental sensation a coffee cup in my hand, and I sustain that state of having that, then that will express itself on what you could call a third dimensional reality, which is the tactile physical world, right? So essentially what you're doing when you're thinking with your thought process is you're building essentially a blueprint reality of what you want. So when you're assuming that you have what you want now, you're taking that time delay out of the equation and you're entering the state of possessing what you want and being who you want to be and doing what you want to do as if you're doing it right now. So you're going to what is called a state of fulfillment. Now, what happens is will is how your soul gets what it wants, basically. We don't need to use fancy words. It's how your soul gets what it wants. So if your soul wills to have a coffee cup, right? The will is the power behind it, right? It's the decision, it's the emphasis, it's the direction that the reality is going to mirror, right? If you have a weak will and you have conditions, meaning that, well, I have to do this before I can do this, you've stated in your mental mind frame that your will cannot go directly into that assumptive state of having it because this certain condition isn't met. So what you want to do is essentially understand that that condition is created in that fourth dimensional reality for your own localized experience. So when you are thinking, your primary goal is to binarily check yes or no. Am I thinking of I am the person I want to be now? And am I thinking as if I have what I want now? And it takes a little bit of mental training because if you've been thinking with distance and place in your mind, you just have to recalibrate the way that your mind automatically goes and assumes things when it is operating in that mental plane. So as you retrain yourself to think I am, I have, what you do is you basically eliminate that time delay. You get your will back because your will can start to go into the states that you choose. And it's not conditional on an external factor, right? Like if you say, I want a dream home, and you can go into the state where you are in that dream home, in that fourth dimensional reality, understanding that the third dimensional reality is a latent reverberation of that higher plane. Now you can go and access any state that you want. But if you have an external condition that is basically saturating your awareness, what will happen is your will won't be able to sustain itself in that end state because you'll have these things kind of impressing itself upon you and your will will get knocked back down. So as you build yourself up, what you want to understand is that your will is the powerhouse, right? Your soul's will is the creative mechanism that will embody the state and then the reality will conform to that state, right? That's why your will is so powerful. But when you are essentially waking up from living a life where your will wasn't the sole power, a good example of that would be like if you have a lot of emphasis on money having the power in your reality. I need money so I can do this, right? That's a conduit, kind of like a little kink in the hose to where if that condition's met, then your will gives you permission to enter that state. But if that condition isn't met, then your will won't enter that state. So what you want to do is you want to disengage that and just start going into the states directly that you want to have because you want to go into them because you will it to be so. And when you start to do that with little stuff like coffee cups or, going out to the bar and you're like, today I'm going to have the best drink at the bar I've ever had, like little things like that. You're exercising your will, your direction, and your focus every single time you do that with a small thing, and you're slowly building your will up, right? And what you'll realize is that all of the things that you wanted, you could have entered in those states, but you had a mental paradigm with conditions that weren't met that you mentally said, well, I can't enter the state because of this, because the state is really the genesis of all creative, assumptive power in this reality, right? And additionally, in this reality, there's a persistence factor, which is something that you wouldn't experience in a higher reality, i.e. a lucid dream. So if you're in a lucid dream and you're like, I want a cup of coffee, boom, it's in your hand. But if you're here and you go, boom, I want a cup of coffee, you'll hold that state affixed with your will and your focus, and then the reality conforms to that through, i.e. what Neville Goddard would call a bridge of incidents, right? So you'd be like, I feel itchy. I'm going to go downstairs and scratch. And then you end up picking up the coffee cup and it matches the state that you're in, right? So you have a bit of this bridge of incidents dynamic that you're navigating through, but it doesn't really matter because the reality is always conforming. So the reality can do whatever it wants. What really your point of emphasis should always be is, what is my end? What is my end state? How do I remain in that end state? And really that comes from your will, because what will happen is you'll go into a state where you're like, I have a coffee cup, and then you may have counter beliefs that are like, well, no, there's no coffee cup in your hand right now. How can that work? What is this thing? Whatever. Your will is the primary thing that needs to be strong enough to batter those down and go, no, I don't identify with that. No, that's not true. No, it's like this. No, it's like this. And you essentially have a defense mechanism for remaining and dwelling in that end state, whereas the world would try to impress and tell you that it's not the case, but it's really just old points of awareness that have manifested that have essentially been states of fear and doubt that you have dwelt in. But nothing is permanent unless you believe it to be so. So as you get your willpower stronger, right? And all you have to do for willpower is use I am affirmations in your mind. I am someone with an indomitable will. I am someone who has unlimited focus and will, because what you think you become and what you focus on, you create. And the way that you choose thoughts and the way that you choose your focus is through your will. You decide, right? Now, if anything can move your will around, that can put you into that double-minded state. So you're never not manifesting, which just means unseen to seen. You're never not creating. But if you have a will that goes back and forth, then it's much more difficult to design your life and intentionally have what you want, because these things will kind of move you around like this and shift your focus and shift your identity and shift your belief systems. You're rocking all over the place, and that's why your life can get a little cray-cray. So your primary goal is to understand first that the power that you have comes from your soul's will. That's your power position. That's why you can decide if affirmations work or not. That's why you can decide if, fourth dimensional thinking works or not. That's why you can decide if any of these practices work. All of these practices are great, and they're great focusing mechanisms, and they're really good for getting you into the state of having and being who you want to have. But the power doesn't lie within them. The power lies within your will, your soul's innate will, because your soul is a dictator of reality, not a dictator in a Sacha Baron Cohen type sense, but a dictator in, I'm dictating the movie script, I'm writing the script, I'm doing this, this, and this. And the only thing that will stop that script from being written is if you believe that another script is more powerful than your own will. And that is what happens when you come into a place and you forget who you are and you get programmed with a bunch of stuff when you're younger, and then you go through the process of deconstructing all of those impressions that had basically dominated and put your will on the back burner. But as you wake up, you remember that your will is the supreme creator and decider of your life, and you're able to use that will to deconstruct those old belief systems and replace them with new belief systems that are in alignment with what you want. Additionally, it's also worth noting that every time you've had contrast or something that you don't like happen, or your will has been beaten down or like this, you've also created the vibrational antithesis of that experience. So every single thing that's gone wrong has only benefited you and helped you to get better through creating new solutions and creating better versions of yourself. So now you're just really lining up with the versions that you want instead of placantly accepting the old iterations of reality that you created when that willpower was dominated by a belief system that wasn't serving you. So I know you guys enjoyed the video. If you'd like to work with me in the coaching, there's a link tree with some options on there for protocols, one-on-ones, and things of that nature. Other than that, leave comments in the video description if you'd like to see videos in the future made on specific topics. And more important than any of that, go conquer, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.